I didn't realize my life was already falling apart until the moment my parents panicked. For most of my life, I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. They handled the bills, the paperwork, the adult stuff. Whenever something official came in the mail, they said it was taken care of. Whenever they needed my signature, they told me it was routine. Whenever I asked questions, they brushed them off and told me not to worry, and I didn't. I was in university, focused on surviving exams, tuition, part-time work, and trying to build a future. I lived at home, which they constantly reminded me was a privilege. They said I was lucky. They said I was saving money. They said everything was under control. What they never told me was that they had opened credit cards in my name, loans, multiple accounts, massive ones. At first, everything looked fine on the surface. Bills were being paid. No collection calls came to the house because I didn't even have access to the mailbox. I didn't have a key. They said it was easier if one person handled the mail. I didn't push back. I trusted them. That trust cost me everything. Near the end of my third year of university, my boyfriend and I started talking seriously about moving in together. Nothing dramatic, just planning. The normal next step, but that meant credit checks, paperwork, independence. The moment I mentioned it, my parents lost it. They didn't just disagree. They freaked out. They told me I was being stupid, that moving out was a waste of money, that I should stay home and save. They forbade me from leaving. Not suggested, not advised, forbade. That's when my stomach dropped, because parents who are confident in the truth don't panic like that. I pushed back gently at first. I said I needed my own space. I said this was normal. I said I was an adult. That's when the arguments escalated. They started monitoring where I went, questioning who I was with, making rules stricter, not looser. Something was wrong. I could feel it, so I did the one thing they didn't want me to do. I checked my credit. I still remember staring at the screen, thinking it had to be a mistake. I refreshed it, closed the tab, opened it again. My hands started shaking. Credit cards I'd never opened, loans I'd never applied for, balances so high my brain couldn't process the number. $660,000 in my name. I couldn't breathe. I felt sick, dizzy, like the room was tilting. This wasn't debt you could figure out. This wasn't a mistake you could fix with budgeting. This was life-ending debt, the kind that destroys futures before they even start. I confronted them that night. They didn't deny it. They said it was temporary. They said they meant to pay it back. They said it was fine when they were paying the bills. They said I was overreacting. I told them they had to clear the debt immediately. I told them they had destroyed my future. I told them I couldn't live like this. They told me they didn't have the money. Then I asked for one thing, just one change. I told them if I was going to stay in that house while carrying their debt, my boyfriend needed to be allowed to stay over sometimes. They laughed. They told me I couldn't strong-arm them into changing the rules of their house. That's when I realized something terrifying. They didn't see me as their child. They saw me as a resource, and I knew, deep down, that if I didn't leave right then, they would destroy the rest of my life too. I didn't call my aunt right away. I sat in my room for hours, staring at the walls I'd grown up with, trying to understand how the people who were supposed to protect me had put me in a hole so deep I couldn't see the bottom. Every sound in the house made me flinch. Their laughter from the living room, the TV playing like nothing had changed. The normalcy of it all made me feel like I was losing my mind. How could they act like everything was fine when my entire future had just been handed a death sentence? Around midnight I finally picked up my phone. My aunt answered on the second ring. She knew something was wrong immediately. I didn't even get past "Can I ask you something?" before my voice cracked. I tried to explain it calmly. I failed. The words poured out in pieces: credit cards, loans, debt, panic, fear, not being allowed to leave. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said something that changed everything. "Sweetheart, how much debt?" When I told her the number, she didn't gasp. She didn't yell. She didn't even sound surprised. She sounded angry. Not at me, at them. She started asking questions, specific ones. Did I open the accounts? Did I sign anything knowingly? Did I ever see the bills? Did I give permission? The more I answered, the quieter she got. Then she told me stories about parents who destroyed their kids' futures out of entitlement, about families who convinced their children that loyalty meant silence, about kids who let it happen because they were scared of being alone. And then she said something I hadn't considered at all. "This is fraud." I remember whispering, "But they're my parents." Her response was immediate. "That doesn't make it legal, and it doesn't make it okay." She asked me if I was safe in the house, if they had threatened me, if I had anywhere to go. When I said no to the first and yes to the second, she told me to pack a bag and come to her place. I didn't tell my parents. I waited until they were asleep. I packed quietly, documents I could find, my laptop, my charger. My hands shook the entire time. I felt like a criminal sneaking out of my own childhood home. When I closed the door behind me, I almost turned back. Almost. My aunt was waiting when I arrived. She hugged me so tightly I finally broke down completely. I cried in her kitchen like a child who'd been holding their breath for years. The next morning, She sat me down with coffee and told me we needed to talk about my options, not what do you want to do, but what needs to be done. She explained identity theft, financial abuse, the long-term consequences if I didn't act. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't scare me either. She told me the truth. If you don't report this, it becomes yours, legally, permanently. I felt sick all over again. She didn't pressure me. She gave me space. But before I went to bed that night, she said one last thing. Choosing yourself doesn't make you a bad daughter. It makes you a survivor. That night, I barely slept because I knew what I had to do, and I knew it would destroy my family. Walking into the police station felt unreal. I remember gripping the straps of my bag so hard my fingers went numb. Like if I let go, I'd fall apart right there in the lobby. My aunt stayed beside me the entire time, calm and steady, like she was anchoring me to reality. Meanwhile, my heart was slamming against my ribs so violently I was sure everyone could hear it. I kept thinking, I can still walk out. I can still pretend none of this happened. But then I remembered the number again, $660,000. That number followed me everywhere. It echoed in my head, sat heavy in my chest, pressed down on my lungs until breathing felt like work. That debt wasn't just money, it was years of my life, my future, my freedom. A police officer led us into a small room and asked me to explain why I was there. At first, I struggled to speak. Saying it out loud made it real, made it permanent. My parents opened credit cards and loans in my name. The officer didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He just listened and typed dot. I told him everything. How I never had access to the mailbox. How all the accounts were opened while I was still in school. How they paid it first, then stopped. How they forbade me from moving out because they were terrified I'd find out. How I only discovered the truth when I needed a credit check. When I finished, there was another silence, but this one felt different. Heavy, serious. Then he asked the question I had been dreading. Did you give them permission to do any of this? No. Did you benefit from the money? No. Did you know the debt existed? No. He leaned back slightly and nodded. That's identity theft. On a large scale, I felt my stomach drop. I had known it logically. Hearing it confirmed out loud felt like someone slammed a door shut behind me. There was no going back now. He explained what would happen next. An official report, an investigation. Financial institutions would be contacted. Statements would be taken. Charges were likely. When he said charges, my chest tightened. These are your parents, he said carefully. Once this starts, you can't undo it. I looked at my aunt. She didn't tell me what to do. She just asked quietly, are you ready? I thought about my parents' faces when they told me I couldn't move out. The way they dismissed my panic, the way they acted like my life was a bargaining chip. I nodded, double quotes, yes. The paperwork took hours. I signed statements, gave time, answered questions until my throat hurt. By the time we left, it was dark outside. I felt hollow, drained, terrified, and relieved for the first time since discovering the debt. I felt like I wasn't drowning alone. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was a detective. He told me they had contacted the banks. The evidence was overwhelming. My parents' names were linked to everything: IP addresses, signatures, payments, withdrawals. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. It was intentional. Then he said the words, I'll never forget, we're going to arrest them. I hung up and sat there staring at the. While I didn't cry, I didn't feel victorious. I felt like the child who had finally admitted something was wrong and was now watching the consequences unfold. That night my parents called me over and over. I didn't answer. The arrests happened early in the morning. I didn't see it in person, but my aunt did. She told me later, in careful pieces, like she was trying not to reopen a wound that was already bleeding. The police knocked just after sunrise, when the street was quiet and most neighbors were still asleep. My parents thought it was a mistake. My mom kept asking if there had been an accident. My dad kept insisting they had the wrong house. They didn't. When the officers explained why they were there, everything unraveled. My mom started crying immediately, loud and dramatic, telling them they were ruining her family. My dad tried to stay calm, tried to sound reasonable, like he could logic his way out of it. He said they were just helping me build credit. He said I was ungrateful. He said I knew about everything and had agreed. None of it mattered. The evidence was too clear. The signatures, the applications, the payments that stopped once the balances exploded, the loans taken out one after another, each larger than the last, all in my name when they were handcuffed. My mom screamed my name. She wasn't screaming because she was sorry. She was screaming because she was angry, angry that I had told someone, angry that I hadn't stayed quiet, angry that I had chosen my future over protecting them. That part hurt more than I expected. I found out about the arrest through my aunt's shaking voice over the phone. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands pressed into the mattress, feeling like the room was tilting. I thought I would feel relieved, or vindicated, or free. Instead, I felt sick. That same day, extended family started calling. Some of them were supportive. They told me I did the right thing, that what my parents did was criminal, no matter who they were, that no parent has the right to destroy their child's future. Others weren't so kind. They told me I was heartless, that family matters should stay private, that I should have worked it out quietly, that I'd ruined my parents' lives. One person even said, "They raised you. You owe them." That sentence stuck with me because I had spent my entire life believing it. I had obeyed their rules, stayed home, trusted them, believed them when they told me they knew best, and they had used that trust to bury me under debt I could never escape on my own. Still, the guilt came in waves. At night, I'd lie awake wondering if I could have handled it differently, if there was some magical solution where I got my life back and they faced no consequences. But every time I went down that road, I ended up in the same place. They weren't sorry until they were caught a few weeks later. The legal process began for me. I met with financial investigators who explained how identity theft cases like mine were handled. They told me that if the charges stuck, and was very likely they would, that debt could be legally removed from my name. That was the first time I cried in front of a stranger. Not because I was sad, because I finally saw a way out. But freedom came with another cost. My parents' lawyer reached out, asking if I would be willing to reconsider my statement. They hinted that things would be easier for everyone if I cooperated, that family therapy might be an option, that prison would be too harsh. I said no, because I finally understood something. If I protected them again, I'd be choosing their comfort over my survival, and I was done doing that. Court didn't look like it does in movies. There was no dramatic music, no shocking confessions, no moment where everyone suddenly understood my pain. It was quiet, clinical, almost boring, and somehow that made everything feel even heavier. I sat behind my aunt, hands folded in my lap, trying not to shake. My parents were across the room. They didn't look at me at first. My dad stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. My mom kept whispering to her lawyer, dabbing her eyes with a tissue like she was the victim in all of this. When the judge began reviewing the case, it felt surreal hearing my life reduced to numbers and documents. Loan amounts, credit limits, missed payments, forged signatures. Each figure hit like a punch. $20,000 here, $50,000 there, hundreds of thousands stacked on top of each other. When the prosecutor explained that the total debt exceeded $660,000, there was an audible reaction in the room. Even the judge paused for a second. Then came my statement. I had rehearsed it 100 times in my head. But when I stood up, everything I planned to say disappeared. My throat closed. My heart hammered. I could feel my parents' eyes on me now. I didn't talk about betrayal right away. I talked about trust. About growing up believing your parents want the best for you. About how I never questioned why I wasn't allowed to see mail or why they discouraged independence. About how I worked hard in university, thinking I was building a future, while they were quietly destroying it behind my back. Then my voice cracked. I told the court that I would never be able to repay that debt, that I would never qualify for housing, loans, or even some jobs, that I would spend my entire adult life paying for something I didn't do. I said, I didn't report them because I wanted revenge. I reported them because I wanted a life. My mom started sobbing openly, but I didn't look at her because for the first time, I wasn't responsible for her emotions. The judge ruled that the debt was fraudulently obtained, that it did not belong to me, that proceedings would begin to formally remove it from my credit history. I nearly collapsed with relief. It wasn't instant. They warned me it would take months. Letters, disputes, investigations, but it was happening. I was getting my future back. Outside the courtroom, my parents tried to speak to me. My dad said we were under pressure. We thought we'd fix it before you noticed. My mom said, "How could you do this to us?" Neither of them said, "I'm sorry." That told me everything. In the weeks that followed, my credit reports slowly began to change. Accounts marked as fraudulent, balances frozen, collection calls stopped coming. I moved in with my aunt permanently. I got my own mailbox key for the first time in my life. I started therapy. I learned how deep the damage really went, not just financially, but emotionally. Some days I felt free, other days I felt broken, but every morning I woke up knowing one thing for sure. I wasn't trapped anymore. Sentencing day felt heavier than the trial. By then, the shock had worn off. The adrenaline was gone. What remained was a deep, uncomfortable awareness that this wasn't just paperwork anymore. This was permanent. Whatever happened next would define the rest of our lives. I almost didn't go. A part of me wanted to pretend it wasn't happening, to stay home to protect whatever fragile peace I'd started building. But my therapist said something that stuck with me. You deserve to witness the moment where this stops controlling you. So I went. The courtroom was quieter than before. Fewer people, less chaos. My parents looked smaller somehow, older. My mom's hair wasn't done like usual. My dad's shoulders were slumped, like he'd finally accepted there was no fixing this. The judge reviewed everything again. The scale of the fraud, the length of time it went on, the fact that it involved their own child. That last part carried the most weight. The judge said something I'll never forget. Parents are entrusted with protecting their children's futures. You used that trust as a weapon. My mom cried loudly, uncontrollably. My dad didn't. He stared at the floor. They were each given sentences reduced because it was their first offense, but still serious. Prison time, restitution, long-term financial monitoring, restrictions that would follow them for years. When the gavel came down, I felt a strange calm, not happiness, not satisfaction, closure. Afterward, I walked out of the courthouse alone. The air felt different, lighter, like I could finally take a full breath without guilt pressing on my chest that night. I sat with my aunt on the couch and did something I'd never done before. I planned my own life. I looked for apartments. I checked my improving credit score. I applied for jobs without fear of background checks. I stopped asking for permission. The debt wasn't fully erased yet, but it was on its way. For the first time, my future felt like something I owned and not something that could be stolen. I also changed my phone number, not out of anger, out of necessity, because healing required distance and because I finally understood something important. Loving someone does not mean sacrificing yourself for them. Life after the courthouse was strange. No one warned me that freedom could feel so heavy. Suddenly, I had choices. Suddenly, my decisions mattered. Every small thing carried weight because it was mine, not dictated by my parents' manipulation. I could move out, get a job, or even go back to university without fear of their interference. But with freedom came the echoes of betrayal. Family calls stopped. My parents didn't contact me, and extended family seemed divided. Some congratulated me, some quietly sided with them, and a few simply avoided the topic altogether. That silence hurt in ways I didn't expect. Not the physical hurt of debt or the fear of loss, but the emotional betrayal that comes from realizing the people you counted on most aren't always trustworthy. I found a small apartment near campus, tiny, cramped, but it was mine. The first night, I unpacked slowly, deliberately, as if every shirt folded and every item placed on a shelf was reclaiming a piece of my life that had been stolen. I cried while doing it, not because I was sad, but because I was finally allowed to feel like myself without fear or guilt. Therapy became a lifeline. I learned to untangle the lies I had been told, that my worth was not tied to obedience, that my parents' abuse was theirs, not mine, that my anger was justified, my fear valid, my relief earned. With each session, I understood more about boundaries, about protecting my future, and about how to rebuild trust in the world. One of the hardest parts was learning to forgive myself, not for what happened because it wasn't my fault, but for the years I spent doubting myself, for believing their words over my instincts, for staying silent when something inside me screamed that something was wrong. I had to relearn how to trust my own judgment, and slowly, the world started opening up again. I got a part-time job that paid decently. I started reconnecting with friends I'd drifted from, partly because of shame and partly because I'd been too busy surviving. I applied for my own credit cards, slowly repairing my score. I started dreaming again, small things at first, a weekend trip, a new laptop, eventually even a car. Through it all, I kept thinking about my parents, not in anger as much anymore, but with clarity. What they did was irreparable, but it no longer had power over me. Their arrests, the court case, the restitution, these were events in my past. They didn't define my next steps. The real miracle, I realized, wasn't that the law worked or that the debt would be cleared. It was that I finally believed I deserved a life free from manipulation, a life I could build for myself. That belief became the foundation for everything else. Asterisk by the time part 8 came around. I was no longer just surviving, I was building. The final step wasn't dramatic. There was no big reveal, no sudden confrontation. It was small, quiet victories stacking up day by day. I finally got official confirmation that all fraudulent accounts were removed from my name. Every bank letter that had once filled me with dread now felt like proof that the nightmare was over. The weight I had carried for years, the crushing, invisible chains of debt was gone. I moved into a new apartment, one I chose myself, with a lease signed in my name only. I decorated it with my own taste. Bright colors, books stacked on the shelves, plants that thrived under my care. It wasn't about showing anyone, I just wanted a space that reflected me, a space I earned. Therapy continued, and I worked through not just the trauma from the fraud, but from the betrayal. I grieved the family I had thought I had, the parents I had trusted, the life I had assumed would be safe. Slowly I replaced fear with empowerment. I learned to set boundaries clearly, to stand firm in my decisions, and to recognize when a relationship, even with family, was toxic. I reconnected with my friends and my boyfriend without guilt. For the first time, I realized that loving people didn't mean giving them control over your life. I could protect my future and still be a caring person. That balance had always felt impossible, but now it was my reality. The day I finally opened my first real paycheck and paid bills that I actually owed, I cried, not from fear or frustration, but from pride, from the knowledge that I had reclaimed everything they had tried to take. My future was mine. Every choice, every move, every plan was on my terms. I don't know if my parents ever understood the gravity of what they did. Maybe they never will, but it doesn't matter anymore. The person I was scared, trapped, silenced was gone. In her place stood someone strong, independent, and capable of defending her own life. The hardest lesson I learned: trust yourself, fight for yourself, and remember that love for your family doesn't mean sacrificing your future to protect their comfort. I still think about the debt sometimes, the number that once loomed over me like a shadow, but now it's a reminder of how far I've come, how much I survived, and how much power I have to shape my own life. And for the first time I feel completely free.